Borges froze, listening to the growing clamor in the mortifactorum. It was coming from the funebris servitors. The cyborgs were standing rigidly, their masks turned towards him as they played upon a host of improvised instruments. Several were clicking scalpels against tweezers, while others drummed slabs with delicate hammers or twanged bone saws. One contributed a screeching refrain with a bone drill. Individually, they would have been insignificant, but in concert, they raised a cacophony, and something more. It's here, Borges realized, recognizing the splintered melody of the laser harp. It got out. This was no conventional malfunction. The air had become electric, thrumming with tension as the cyborgs wove ever more elaborate loops of auditory disorder. Abruptly, the mechanized mortuary niches spun into life, adding the whir and grind of machinery to the medley as they sped about behind their hatches. It's coming for me. Still playing, the servitors advanced on the apothecary, their alabaster masks glowing softly in the gloom, their instruments held before them like offerings. "Cease operations," Borges commanded, but the thralls paid no heed. He counted them quickly. 18. They were a trivial threat, however their music was another matter. He touched the vox jewel pinned to his lapel. "This is Borges," he shouted into the transmitter. "Alarum prioris. The mortifactorum has been compromised." A tinny reproduction of the hellish music answered him. Cursing, the apothecary pocketed his voxcoder and drew his bolt pistol. He'd been carrying it since his visit to the castellan's chamber. As he took aim at the nearest servitor, there was a groan from the other side of the hall, so deep it reverberated through the babel. Riseron. Borges knew it before he turned around. The cadaver had risen. Quite literally risen. It hovered in the air a few feet above its slab, as though suspended on invisible cords. Though it hung upright, its limbs were slack and its head bowed, proffering the emptiness of its open cranium. Its chest was a vertical maw, grinning with snapped ribs, the raw-edged lips pinned back with shiny clamps. Dissected organs orbited the corpse in a languid corona, rotating like fleshy planetary bodies. "Abomination," Borges hissed. The revenant moaned in answer, the sound bubbling up from somewhere deep inside its abdomen. Then it floated towards him, eyeless but not blind. No, not eyeless either, the apothecary realized, for both Riseron's eyeballs swam in the vortex of organs orbiting the corpse, trailing fibrous nerve bundles. "Arc Eternal," Borges yelled, opening fire. His first 3 bullets detonated inside the cadaver's chests. Its back erupted, vomiting chunks of meat and shattered spine. The 4th ripped it apart at the waist. With a wet tearing sound, its legs flopped onto the slab, but its torso stayed aloft, bobbing on a ragged skirt of flesh. "The music won't let it die," he gauged as he fired again, aiming two-handed and ignoring the advancing servitors. His 5th shot obliterated the ghoul's right shoulder, leaving the arm dangling by a thread of sinew. The 6th punched into its open skull and drilled down to its throat before detonating, decapitating it more completely than a blade ever could. And yet the force animating the corpse wouldn't relent. Twitching with a life of their own, Riseron's legs rose from the slab, along with countless other scraps of flesh and bone scattered in the vicinity. Undulating like misshapen worms, they glided back to the corpse, not to occupy their former positions, but to join the organs orbiting it. Borges kept shooting, tearing away chunks of the unholy ring, only for them to ooze back, smaller and more liquescent than before. "I can't kill it," he realized, accepting the fact calmly. "Not like this." The monstrosity bore little resemblance to humanity now, only its torso was recognizable, like a dead sun at the center of a charnel constellation. The gyre was accelerating in time with the cacophony, almost mesmerizing in its complexity. Borges noticed he'd begun to murmur the melody. His hearts were pounding to its beat. "Be silent," he snarled, snapping his lips free of the taint. Something moved at the corner of his eye. He spun aside as a scalpel slashed at his neck. One of the servitors had reached him. He grabbed its wrists as it hacked again, then rammed his gun into its mask and fired. 2 more servitors lunged for him as their headless brother spun away, flailing about in its death throes. Borges executed them in a quick succession. A 3rd hurled a scalpel an instant before a bolt round punched into its chest. The thrown blade sliced through the air with uncanny speed, coming straight for his face. He ducked aside, but it arced round improbably and buried itself in the back of his neck. A human would have been killed outright, but the blade couldn't quite penetrate his denser muscle sheathing. Borges yanked it out as the Rhizaeron thing's stench washed over him. It reeked of blood and medical unguents, mingled with the resinous fetor of the laser harp. The world rippled around him like a reflection in troubled waters, inciting a sympathetic spasm from his muscles. "No," Borges hissed as his gun slipped from twitching fingers. The skin on the digits was moving, as though seeking a way to flee the bones beneath. The apothecary bit down on his tongue, drawing blood. The pain reigned in his flesh. Had the scalpel been poisoned? The whole world is poisoned. The thought didn't belong to him. Did it? Swaying, he saw the revenant had drawn closer. He was almost within reach of its whirling viscera now. Their dance was unraveling the very air around them, twisting space inside out and into something incomprehensible. Only because you're afraid to look. Yes, there was the truth buried in that tormented mandala of flesh. If only he accepted. More pain lanced through him as something bored into his hip, chewing through the black carapace under his skin. It was the servitor with the bone drill. With a cry of rage, Borges slammed a fist into his attacker's face, cracking its mask like an eggshell. A fragment fell away, revealing withered skin and lidless white eyes. Before his foe could react, he dragged it from its feet and hurled it into the vortex. It was consumed in seconds, stripped down into fragments that swelled the ring. Borges turned and ran, barreling through another pair of servitors. The revenant glided after him, sweeping up any cyborgs or corpses in its path. Though the players died, the music never faltered. It had outgrown its mortal instruments and made them immortal. As Borges reached the mortuary's entrance, a vigilant custodian burst through the door, doubtless drawn by the commotion. The warrior reacted without hesitation, charging the abomination with his bolt gun raised. "No, brother," Borges yelled as the newcomer passed him. "Fall back," but if the warrior heard, he paid no heed. Ignoring the servitors, who were no threat to an armored Astartes, he opened fire on the monstrosity swooping to meet him. Its gyre had grown much larger, multiplied by its feasting, now extending over 10 feet. It spun about the torso like a tornado, spraying waves of disorder through the chamber. A demon, Borges judged, trying to tear his eyes away from the flesh storm. To the blind, a traitorous thought followed. A liberator to the sighted. The custodian's gunfire tore a swath through the ring, but it reformed faster than he could cull it. Undaunted, he kept firing until the outer band swept over him, staining his blue and silver plating crimson. He shuddered violently as though an earthquake had erupted beneath his armor. The air around him seethed with contradictory colors, transforming him into a flickering silhouette. His bolter was yanked into the maelstrom, then his arms, wrenched from their sockets in geysers of blood. A moment later, the rest of him followed. His body completed 2 circuits before it was gone. Not gone, but arisen, the music sang without words, unraveled into the infinite. Yes, Borges realized. I see it. He took a halting step toward the destroyer before catching himself. I see a lie, he hissed through gritted teeth. Breaking free, he hurled himself through the doorway and slammed the hatch behind him. It was built of thick plasteel as a precaution against contamination, yet it couldn't silence the demon song completely. Because it's inside me, Borges realized as tremors racked his muscles. His fingers resisted when he tried to key the lockdown code into the access panel by the door, curling away from the buttons like worms. Their revolt forced him to start over 3 times before he completed the sequence. There was a clang as bolts slotted into place, sealing the mortuary. Initiate putrefaction sequence extremis, Borges yelled into the panel speaker grill. Authorization? Apothecarion external Borges. Voice pattern validated, the mechanism spirit confirmed. Commencing purge. An alabaster face appeared at the door's viewing portal, staring at the apothecary. Moments later, there was a muted whoosh, and it disappeared in a white-hot furnace. In its final moments, the rigid mask appeared to smile. Burn, Borges growled. He noticed his left hand was creeping towards the access panel. Cursing, he punched the wall, trying to beat his fingers into submission, but the descent had spread through his whole body. His hearts were still drumming to the infernal rhythm, pumping discord into his bloodstream. No, he groaned, shaking his head. Only an illusion, a compulsion. The disorder was rooted in his mind, where all madness stemmed from. According to the Ark, that was where everything stemmed from. Borges yanked the alarm lever by the door and slid to the ground, his back to the wall. Somnium custodia meam ex tenebris, he whispered in High Gothic. It was a rarely spoken mantra that stimulated the catalepsin node in his brain. All Adeptus Astartes received the sleep-regulating implant during their ascension, but few chapters had such precise control over it. The psych-conditioning rites of the Resplendent had been profoundly, many would say heretically, modified during the Reformation, though only the first magister understood the full extent of it. Borges closed his eyes as the mantra took hold. The spasms racking his body receded, and merciful oblivion swept over him.